6 players shared the lead going into the final round of the British Championship. And those 6 players all played against each other. So it was an extraordinary finish. And I'd like to look at all 3 of those top games. So first of all, we've got Nikita Vitugov playing white against Stuart Conquest. Well, we saw yesterday how Stuart had played this unbelievable attack with white in the Czopor. If you haven't seen that video, just check it out. It's great stuff. So how would he fare against Vitugov, Russian emigre, now representing England, and a very tough opponent. Now, he's been over 2,700. So this is really tough for Stuart. Well, typically, Stuart went for a curveball from the off. Knight c6, d4, and then e5. Well, this was an old favourite of Tony Miles. Stuart knew Tony really, really well. And, you know, Tony was famous for bamboozling his opponents at an early stage. So Stuart is trying the same thing. So Vitugov played d5. So this is the approved method. And here, h4 from Vitugov. Well, already we've got a really strange position on the board with this h-pawn flying up the board at a very early stage. I don't see anything wrong with playing knight f3. That's the approved move. But h4, very interesting. So obviously directed against the knight coming here, and then it's just going to be pushed away again. Knight f6, good move. Bringing out a piece, attacking the pawn. And h6 from Stuart after some thought. So obviously stops the h-pawn in its tracks once it gets to h5, but also it prevents bishop g5, which can be a very annoying move. Vitugov played h5 anyway, so restricting this one. And obviously depriving this knight of a square. d6 from Conquest. So it looks like a very strange kind of King's Indian, except the pawn is on c2, not c4. Now Vitugov played f4. Well, you know, the last round of tournaments when you're playing for first place, they can do that does strange things to a person. And I think Vitugov just lost his head for a moment. How many pawn moves has white made? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 pawn moves in 7 moves. And that's too much. And after this move, c6, I think this really just puts the finger on the spot. You know, it shows that white is going to have a problem here because this queen is about to come out. Looking at this diagonal, also looking at b2. There's pressure on the d5 pawn. Already this is a difficult position for white. So it went like this, knight g4. Now probably the best is just to give up knight for bishop like this and just compromise, because at least this knight is still not very well placed. But Vitugov played bishop d2, but after this, g5, great move from Stuart. You know, he revels in these kind of unorthodox positions. I mean, if that were taken en passant, then the knight would come into the game with great effect. So bishop g3, queen b6, excellent move. So been on the cards after c6 was played, and looking down here as well. Now, shouldn't take the pawn because then, well, white just gets fantastic compensation then. But instead, bishop g7, bishop's on an incredible diagonal. And already this, whoops, beg your pardon, this is tremendous for black after this move, c takes d5. It's just going to open things up here. This is already open, and don't forget that diagonal too. So let me just go on a few more moves. This check doesn't matter. Stuart's king was actually fine in the middle of the board. And here f5. King is safe. This is a really potent kingside pawn majority. And after this, Stuart made a really practical move, actually. You could continue playing for the attack, but this is really sound. Because in the endgame, Black's pieces are absolutely superb. And all three pawns are very weak. Actually, Vitugov did a very good job of hanging on. Nevertheless, after 44 moves, this is the position on the board. Incredibly, material is still even, but Black's pieces are very strong. d5, good move, attacking the knight. And the game finished like this. King d4 is a blunder, but if, for example, this and Black is about to take that pawn, very sound extra pawn, should be winning. But instead, King d4 was played, which looks like a good idea to support the knight, bring the king forward. But after this move, White is in huge trouble, threatening a big check. The knight came back, and then rook f3. And two different checkmates are threatened. Here, Vitugov resigned. I mean, it really is hopeless. You could try this to give the king some room, but after this... wins very easily. So, tremendous game from Stuart Conquest. And with that win, well, the only question was, who else could catch him? Let's look at the other two games. So let's go to Michael Adams, who'd been leading the tournament all the way, against Maciej Czopor from Poland. Well, this was a Sicilian defence that had gone pretty well for Adams. You know, he's very good in these kind of positions where you castle queenside. So Adams is the exchange up. But it's still tricky. a3. But Adams had this one under control. Rook b5. Of course, when you're the exchange up, really good to exchange major pieces. But it's still a difficult position. Queen e4. Adams keeping control. A takes b2. Okay, there's pressure here. So rook e2 just kind of holds everything together. Typical Adams. He wants to play from a sound basis. He doesn't lunge in too quickly. But he crawls into Black's position. So the rook is beautifully placed on the 7th rank. And bishop e1 pushes the queen away, and bishop takes b4. Well, once that pawn goes, that's a big relief for White. And now Adams starts to take the initiative on the king side. You can see with threats here. King h8. a3. Cemento, as Peter Lecco would say. Just super solid. And rook f7. So this is how the game ended. This isn't cemento, this is collapso. And Adams broke through. So queen g6 threatened. And after this, queen f3 is a pretty tidy finishing move. And queen h5, game over. So that was a very controlled performance by Michael Adams. Not a perfect game, but he never was in any real trouble and put the game away very well. So he joined Stuart Conquest in first place. And then we had Richard Pert against Peter Roberson, two international masters. Roberson had, I think, basically equalised the position out of the opening. And I think odds on in this kind of position, we're going to see some piece exchanges, some pawn exchanges, and there's not a lot to play for here. But of course, both players wanting to play for a win, to have a shot at first prize. So Richard Pert played Queen G4. Okay, keeps the queens on and prepares to bring a rook to the centre. A takes B5, continuing to exchange pawns. And now Pert throws in Rook D1. So he wants to avoid an exchange of pieces. Fair enough, he wants to keep that rook on the board. Hits the queen and was no doubt expecting Queen C8 and Knight takes B5. And, well, I don't think Black should have any problems here, but, well, White does have a bit of play. White is a bit more active. But instead of moving the queen, I think this is a really interesting move from Roberson. He simply gave up his queen. So rook takes queen, rook takes rook, queen takes c4 and c5. Okay, so let's take stock after that little exchange of pieces. So Roberson has rook and bishop against the queen. He has a really solid position, super solid on the king side. I mean, White has 0 attacking chances now. These pieces are going to come into the game. Knight will come into the game very easily, possibly via c6, d4, maybe b4. That bishop doesn't have an opponent. It's very, very strong. These minor pieces aren't so great, particularly that bishop on g3. I mean, I suppose this knight may be able to float into d6, but it's not doing that much there. Could possibly just be exchanged off. Maybe you can play around it. I think the fact this pawn is on e5 makes things a little bit difficult for White because that square can be used by Black. So interesting compensation. If you feed this into a computer, it says that White is slightly better. But I think it's just quite a dynamic position, actually. And as we're going to see, very easy for both sides to go wrong, actually. Pert is continuing striving for the initiative. Queen e4. Knight a5. I think he wanted to prevent this knight coming into b4 and d5. But now bishop a6, so an annoying pin. And here, I think if White plays queen a4, then it's about level. So, for example, knight c6, this could happen. Black is absolutely rock solid. You can control d5. Maybe it's possible to target his pawn. I think it's about equal, basically. I don't see that Black would have any difficulties there at all. Possibly White has to be careful because that bishop is so poor. In any case, Richard did not play queen a4. Instead, he played knight c7. This was a lunge. And this was a bit impatient. I don't know whether he miscalculated this. Maybe he thought this was possible. I don't know. In fact, this is winning for Black after this. So king takes bishop played, and rook b8, and this knight isn't going anywhere. It's trapped. And White's pieces are so bad. I mean, the knight can't be saved, and well, I beg your pardon, it can be saved. Let's just have a quick look, but it's actually a very poor position with 2 rooks against the queen. So, for example, okay, this is the game continuation. Rook c8. So it was possible to save the knight with queen a4. But after this, I think Black has a tremendous position because Black is so solid. The king is completely safe. That pawn is safe. And then the rooks can rampage. This pawn looks like it's in big trouble. So Richard decided to go all in like this. So material balance is now queen against 2 rooks and a bishop and knight. Well, there are some pawns, but Black is so well coordinated that this is basically a pretty easy win for Black. And indeed, 20 odd moves later, Peter Roberson did the biz and won the game. So that meant 3 players shared first place at the end of the tournament. So we've got Stuart Conquest, Michael Adams and Peter Roberson. So they've all had fantastic tournaments. Then there came a playoff, a rapid play playoff. Now, under the tiebreak rules, the player with the highest performance rating in the tournament went straight through to the final. So that was Michael Adams. So Stuart Conquest and Peter Roberson played a match, 2 rapid play games to see who would face Adams. Conquest won that. Convincingly, he won both games. I mean, there were lots of ups and downs in the games, but basically he played better. So Adams Conquest in the final. And basically, I mean, Michael Adams is such a classy player. I mean, you know, for many years, one of the best players in the world. And this was always going to be tough for Stuart. Stuart lost the first game. He actually had a very nice position, but he was outplayed. And in the second game, well, I mean, Stuart had a terrible position, but he fought back. And by this stage, with black, he's actually doing okay. He's still in the game. If he played knight e8, looking at potentially rerouting that knight later on, black is still doing okay. But I think it's so interesting the way Michael Adams handled being under pressure here. He didn't commit at all. He just remained absolutely rock solid. And you can see for black to break into that is really difficult. And Stuart ran short of time. Didn't find the right way. Played queen c4, but after this move, with these little creeping moves so typical of Michael Adams, the initiative swung over to white. So rook h1 and queen h3 is now on the cards. So Stuart felt he had to break things open. This made things even worse after this. It is actually possible to take this because after this move, of course, taking this would fork queen and rook. But this is just so solid for white with the idea of rook d3 and basically white is taking control. In any case, short of time, Stuart didn't realise that he could possibly take this and played this move. And then after knight e4, which is again a typical Peter Lecco cemento move and so typical of Michael Adams. He's just played so solidly, doesn't give his opponent a way in, always makes it difficult. Protects everything. You can see that knight is a wonderful piece. And then it was plain sailing, particularly with Stuart, really short of time. Nice move, just exchanging off that active rook. And then this pawn dropped. And Adams just creeping forwards. And this is the end of the game. A check, rook takes a6, and yeah, Stuart had quite enough. So, although there were ups and downs in these 2 rapid play games in the final, I think Michael Adams' class really shone through, and he won both those games reasonably convincingly anyway. So there we go. Michael Adams is the British champion 2025. That's the 9th British Championship title that he's won. Just an incredible record. He's 53 years old. You know, he's getting on a bit, but honestly, the way he plays, if you'd seen those tie breaks at the end, the way he was so composed, he really is a remarkable player. I think Jonathan Penrose has won the British title 10 times. So Mickey's getting pretty close to him. So congratulations to Mick anyway. Absolutely stellar performance again. Hope you enjoyed that. See you soon.